Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Albert Bramante. Albert has spent over 20 years as a talent agent. In addition, he's a psychology professor, hypnosis and NLP expert, and author of Rise Above the Script. He's also the founder of Bramante Artist. He helps performers, educators, and creators to unlock their potential through a variety of approaches to fuel unstoppable momentum and help those individuals who request his services achieve both their professional and personal goals. So with that, Albert, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. It's a pleasure having you on the program today.
Thank you so much, Dave, for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, so we met. You reached out to me. You just did a cold email, reaching out to a variety of different podcasts. And a lot of times I don't respond to cold pitches because I never know where they're coming from, or they could be AI generated or just, bot generated. But when I did the research on your background, I found out that we aligned from an academic perspective as far as philosophy with both of our backgrounds. And I thought, your diverse experiences would be a great fit for my audience. So I'm glad we were able to make this happen today.
Me too. I'm really glad to be here.
So with that, my first question for you is tell our audience about the experience or experiences that have shaped your life path and your life passions today.
Well, there were a few. I think just growing up in a family environment where I was a little bit different. I'm the youngest of five. I have three older brothers, one older sister, and all of them were very much into sports, very much into athletics. My father was a football coach. Sports were kind of like my family's bloodline. I had no interest, no desire, nothing whatsoever. I also didn't really have the ability to play sports. I didn't have a coordination, but I also had no desire to learn either. So even to this day, I have no interest in watching being spectators. Sports doesn't do anything for me, but it's like my family's lifeline in a sense. And so that was a bit different when I grew up in a different environment. Secondly, I love to read. I enjoyed when people would read to me as a child, and then I picked up books. And being that I wasn't, my family did everything in the sports, I was really so much into books. So I spent a lot of time in the library, as a child growing up in my primary years. I spent most of the time, my weekends in the library, and I did a lot of reading. And I just became very, a passion to be like a student. That was my calling, and that was different because my family wasn't into that. At least, my siblings. So I spent, during my reading, I read a lot of nonfiction books in high school. I read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, which was really inspiring. I also read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That was also extremely inspiring. And then my first, I guess you could say, therapy book was, it was groundbreaking at the time, but it was David Burns wrote a book on cognitive behavioral therapy called Feeling Good. And that was, I read that like 3 or 4 times in high school. I really enjoyed it. And for me, that just became my turning point, saying, hey, I want to major in psychology. I want to be a therapist. But I also loved academics. And that, in high school, I kind of had an awakening. I wasn't a failure, but wasn't an A student. I didn't fail anything, but I was like the B and C primarily. And it wasn't until like, the beginning of my junior year that I woke up and transitioned from a B, C student to a straight A student and really started loving scholarship. And that became my fun, even my gateway. Most people my age, when I was 16, 17, 18, they'd be partying on the weekend. I was reading books. And that was what I was content with. So when I was a junior in high school, my goal was to be a psychologist and be a PhD. Because I just, again, I loved reading, I loved scholarship, I loved research. So even before I set foot in the college, campus, I knew I wanted to have a doctorate for my name. And strictly, focusing on psychology. So I would say my undergraduate and graduate years, I was very much involved in research, reading, and I was typically a nerd. I mean, I was a thinker. And even a lot of professors that had always, praised me because whenever we do research papers, I would go into an extremely deep dive. I would have the longest literature review. I'd have the longest, sources because I wanted to be comprehensive. So, but I was also very involved in high school and college, like in extracurricular activities and clubs and organizations. And some of those clubs and organizations were the theater and drama focus, which kind of led me down the second path, on the actor artistic side. So when I was completing my master's degree, I did my master's degree in marriage and family therapy, concentration in marriage and family therapy. And I became extremely interested in expressive arts therapies. I started reading a little bit of Virginia Satir, a little bit of Chloe Madonis, who now works with Tony Robbins. But I became very interested in short form therapy and unconventional approaches. Then I took some time off because I had applied to 3 PhD programs. When I was getting my master's degree, I went straight through from my bachelor's to master's, and I was going to do straight through, the PhD route. But I underestimated, and the competitiveness PhD programs were to get into. So unfortunately, I didn't get into any of the 3 that I applied to, which now looking at the time it was surprising. But when I speak to other people now, though, that's understandable because it's very competitive. And I did have a strong GPA. I had a 3 point, between the 3.8 and 3.9 in grad school. And I was also had conference presentations and research experience. I was research assistant on a couple of different projects. So I had assumed, I guess, I'm going to be a shoe-in, and I wasn't. So I had to take some time off. Now, that was the same year when I graduated my master's degree that 9/11 had happened, 2001. So I found myself with people that have contacts that I've had to be volunteering, working with 9/11 survivors, and family members, people been affected, especially rescue workers. And I started working alongside of actors and artists. And that kind of brought back my interest because I did have a slight interest I was in a drama club. I did take a couple of acting classes as electives in college. So that kind of brought back my interest into it a bit. So, the early 2000s, I did a little bit of acting myself. But what I really enjoyed wasn't so much the experience of acting, but being around actors. That's what truly brought me joy and everything.
Yeah, I mean, from an early age, it just sounded like you had an innate curious mind. You were reading from a young age. Your literature reviews were very detailed in graduate school, which meant that you were innately curious. And I think we got to stay curious, I think, to be able to continue to evolve as individuals, personally and professionally. So what was it, or what is it about actors, or what was it at that point about actors that you found just really exciting or enticing or attractive to work with?
I think, to be quite transparent, it was a part selfish. And I think that when I mean by selfish, I really connected. And I think this was a group of people I really felt seen with because, like I said, even when I was in drama club in high school, I really identified with these people. And, when I was taking some acting classes, we would sometimes hang out afterwards because a lot of the people in the class were part of the college productions. And so we'd go see a show and then we'd hang out afterwards. I felt really seen. Everybody was so accepting and inclusive. I wasn't really bullied in high school or junior high, but I also wasn't the popular kid either. I didn't have that many friends. I had a lot of acquaintances and I was very well liked, but I was never like had the most friends. So I think this is the first time I really felt seen. And I think that was part of it. Plus, I just think the sensitive nature of a lot of art and actors, I think the curiosity, because especially as an artist, as an actor, curiosity is like the backbone of everything.
Mhm. Absolutely. And, for me, I've never been involved in the acting world, but I appreciate great performances. One of the greatest performances I think I've ever seen in the actual movie theater was Sean Penn in Mystic River.
Oh,
When he discovered that his daughter was dead and murdered, that scene was so realistic to me. You would have thought in real life that he had experienced the death of a child. But I know he experienced a lot of losses of friends. I think it was due to addiction, and I think about 10 of his friends that he grew up in Malibu, so he was no stranger to grief. But the way he put his heart and soul into that performance, I got chills, Albert, watching it.
yeah, no, I know it's a performance. It was really strong. And that's one thing that actors are good at, sometimes their expense, but is they channel that because that's what he most likely did in the moment when he was performing that role, instead of course, the pseudo or fake daughter, really. He might have put, who knows if he found any of his friends, dead because of overdose or witnessed his friends dying and just, transferred that pain into that moment, which made it, again, realistic. Because very often, what I notice with actors, especially when they perform very emotional scenes, true, it is definitely, again, it's acting, it's fake, but the emotions aren't always fake. What really is going on there. I've had a lot of, conversations with actors who needed some time, take off some time after playing a role in a film or a show that was dark because it just got too much for them.
Yep.
So on the surface level, they are pretending, but sometimes they're not, and or at least emotionally.
Well,
The scene may be set up, the scene is staged, but a lot of times the emotions that are being experienced in the moment are real.
yeah, and particularly if those emotions are based on real life tragedies that they've experienced or transitions or challenges, then yeah, I can imagine it would be really difficult to detach from that once the picture's over, once the Broadway play is over, once the movie's been produced. So, but yeah, I mean, I've always felt that creative individuals were just more than what their roles were on the screen, that there was more behind them. And I think you probably got to see that being a part of that, a part of that club. You got to see the total picture, which is probably why you are trusted in terms of working. You've been trusted with over 20 years with working with actors and other performers because you've done it. You've been allowed to get a glimpse into their lives beyond the stage, and they trust you with it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
Now, I know you work with students, you work with teachers, you work with performers, and you help them break through a variety of different blocks, utilizing a diverse mixture of approaches. Can you elaborate on the approaches that you use and how you determine which approaches you use with each individual that you
Well,
serve?
a lot of it, when it comes to determining what approach I use, it really depends upon the person's in front of me. Our protocol, there's like in so many different ways. There's like, okay, you got to follow this step protocol, and those are important. But what's really important though is the person in front of you. It really depends upon what they need. So a lot of times, especially when it comes to students, a lot of them have some trauma that they're dealing with that appears in the classroom where Maybe it's a reluctance to participate. Maybe it's I remember even this semester, I had a couple conversations with students, kind of gently asking why weren't they participating. And some of them would say, I don't really have anything to say. I'm like, yes, you do.
Mhm.
You have experience. And I think we can all benefit from that. So a lot of it is just playing on their strengths, helping them to help themselves. That's the end, game of it all, to really see how great we are by sometimes getting in touch with that inner strength that we have.
Mhm.
And even with actors, because a lot of times, the lifestyle of an actor is very chaotic. It's not like a stable 9 to 5. When you work in a gig economy like this, like especially with actors or creatives, there's no guarantee when you're going to get your next paycheck. It can be months, it can be years. So, so a lot of times, most actors need a survival job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, they're getting told no more than they're going to get told yes. And that's the reality of it. You could be the best actor around, and you're still going to get more no's than you're going to get yeses. And that over time can wear down the psyche. I use this example a lot with when a lot of actors go to their families or friends over the holidays or reconnect, and they're sitting at dinner, and often you'll hear, well, what have you been into? What have you been up to? So tell me, what have you been in? What have you been in? And, sometimes the actor says, well, I haven't worked a lot, but I've been auditioning.
Yeah.
Maybe once or twice, family members going to hear this and say, maybe you shouldn't be doing this acting thing.
Right.
And that's a dream killer right there.
Yeah, particularly when you don't have support from those people that you've trusted, those people in your family, and that, with the high pressure stakes that there is in acting, and he said they're going to get more rejections than they're going to get, affirmatives, and that's got to be something you must deal with all the time, whether it manifests as imposter syndrome or anything. Yeah, that's got to be something you have to deal with a lot with the individuals that you service.
Absolutely. That's perfect reading of imposter syndrome is, I really don't feel I'm, to really call myself an actor.
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of it is to begin to help them is to really, the first step is educating ourselves and other people that this is a script we're running in our head, not often reality.
Mhm. Yeah.
So this limitation that we're experiencing is really self-imposed.
Yeah, it's the things that we tell ourselves that determine how we react, how we behave. It's like I saw this meme, Albert, on Facebook that said something to the effect of sometimes our own worst enemy lies between our two ears. And
Absolutely.
it's just the things that we tell ourselves, that's what we interpret about ourselves because of our experiences, good or bad, that determine how we see the world. And if our mindset is negative, our belief system is based on our interpretation of experiences as being negative, we're going to automatically gravitate or align with those experiences that are going to reinforce that mindset.
We're going to look for situations, because that's what our minds do, is look for, situations that confirm our expectations or our beliefs.
Yeah.
Just like, and this could even be turned for good. If I could wake up and if I'm already have the conception of having a bad day, and I tell myself that, oh, I'm having a bad day today, my brain is then going to be primed to look for everything
Yeah.
that's going wrong.
Yeah.
Consequently, I could do the opposite and say I'm having a great day. And the same thing, now my brain's going to look for good things that are happening.
Yeah. It's just kind of reframing that perspective. I mean, what day do we choose to have? Are we going to have a bad day or are we going to have a good day?
Right.
If we choose to have a good day, we're going to align with those experiences that are going to reinforce that belief that we're going to have a good day and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the other thing you mentioned about students, I tell the students in the classroom, we're all students and teachers, so let's learn from each other. I can learn as much from you as you can learn from me. And I don't
Absolutely.
And I don't care what other professors have told you about your performance. I don't care if you had a D in other classes. I'm going to treat you as if you're capable of doing great things. Now, whether you buy into that, that's on you. But I'm never going to treat you as less than capable of achieving excellence. Not perfection, but excellence.
Yeah. And that's the same message I often give to my students as well, that you are. Because I've had, especially in some of my freshman classes, I've had students that most of their career were in middle school, junior high, and high school, or in special education classes.
Mhm.
If they never said that to me, I never would have guessed that, because some of them did even better than most of the students in the class.
Mhm.
So I'm like, I never would have known that if you didn't tell me that. And that's where, again, it's that labeling comes in. This is why labels can be very destructive
Mhm.
with students, not with students, but even mental health diagnoses, physical diagnoses, because again, when we're given that label and we believe that label, our brain is going to look for a situation to confirm that belief.
Absolutely. And, I believe diagnostic labels should be reviewed every year. And if the diagnosis doesn't fit, the diagnosis needs to be modified. We measure intelligence. There's standardized intelligence testing to Stanford, Binet, and other, but standardized implies that it's one set of standards meets everybody's needs, and it doesn't. We measure intelligence differently.
Of
Um,
course.
I think the fact that maybe somebody's in a special education class doesn't mean that they're not as intelligent as somebody who isn't. They just manifest it differently.
Right.
And we have to understand what their capabilities are, how they manifest those capabilities and work to their strengths.
Yeah. And I've never been a fan of standardized testing. I mean, maybe that's part of it too, but I know I struggled a lot in school. I'm product of the 80s and 90s, which were standardized testing was kind
Mm.
of really prominent then. The SATs, the high school proficiency tests.
Mhm.
And to me, it just never made sense how we're going to judge somebody's potential on one single test on one single day.
Yeah. 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 If you were going to predict my performance on the SATs, I would have made the janitor's list all throughout college.
Yeah.
Um, I got like, I think, geez, Albert, maybe less than a 1,200 combined on the SATs.
Same here. I had like 1,100. And, people were like, oh, I remember my teacher was like, I don't understand, and I took it a few times. It wasn't just like one time. And so now, according to that statistic, I should have either been struggling or failing out of school
Mhm.
if we went by that metric alone.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I graduated with honors. I graduated with distinction and honors for undergrad and distinction from my graduate school. So that doesn't make sense. Consequently, I've also seen people that, in my community that went to high school with who did very well on them and bombed out of college.
Yep.
So it's not really a predictor of success. Same thing with a lot of college entrance exams.
Mhm.
One day performance determines whether or not I'm gonna have to take, remedial classes, in
Yeah.
college, and multiple classes. So that's been an issue that's been plaguing the system. But I agree, the labels, the tests, the standards, they don't always apply. And for me, I like to look at the person as a whole,
Mhm.
make my own opinions and form my own
Mhm.
opinions based upon my interactions in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, context is everything, and how the person responds in certain situations, how they behave in certain situations. I mean, you look at kids. If you're going to really get a good picture of a child's behavior, you have to observe them in the home, in the school, and at play, because they're going to give you three different sets of behaviors depending on context. So you put it all together, and that's how you get a picture of the child or the individual that you're working with, not just going through a standard checklist or through a behavioral checklist to rule out certain mental health conditions. Basically, it's like you get to know the person and see how they function in a variety of different areas. So, um, yeah, it sounds like I could see why after the pre-call that we were both kind of, at least I was excited to get you on the podcast because,
Yeah.
I mean, the way you see behavior is very similar to the way that I see it in terms of assessing behavior and determining how an individual relates to the world. But one of the things I wanted to get back to self-sabotage, because I know you deal a lot with self-sabotage. I know we've already talked about imposter syndrome. What are the similarities and differences in how self-sabotage manifests for performers, students, and teachers?
Well, so for students, self-sabotage should be not studying, or they walk into class thinking, okay, especially math. Now, although I don't teach math, a lot of my students have difficulties in math. And I challenge them. I spend a lot of time actually talking about this in my psychology classes because I feel like, is this really because they can't do it or because they think they can't do it? So again, you walk into class, let's say, maybe you took this class in high school, whether it could be math, it could be English, and you didn't do, it wasn't that positive experience for you. So now automatically you go to class, sit in the back, you make a little eye contact with the professor. You don't even really crackle in the book because you have such a negative attitude towards that. And that is purely self-sabotage. It has nothing to do with your ability. I've had students who, in my experience, the reason why I started noticing this as a major issue, I would have students, and I'm not sure if you found this too, where they would just stop coming to class. They would just stop coming for and it wasn't like, okay, they would email me and say, hey, I have this issue going on. They would just stop coming. Now, sometimes they would address me at the end, when grades are due, like, oh, hey, professor, I need to talk to you. And I've learned, like, I put this in my syllabus in the beginning. I'm like, that's not approach is not going to work with me. But I think a lot of it, that's what was the biggest factor of self-sabotage, would be that aspect of it. For teachers, I would say similar thing, not really engaging, coming into class, going through their emotions, but just like half doing it, not fully engaging on the class, having sometimes a negative view of the students already, without even having significant interactions with them. And for performers, it looks like not going on auditions enough, not being prepared for auditions. The thing about self-sabotage is it's a very tricky behavior. Because it's not something that we're doing consciously. Like I said, the student who was behaving that way in math class really believes that he or she cannot do well in mathematics. But not realizing that, yes, you can. You just need to switch your mindset to more of a growth mindset rather than, I can't do this. The actor, again, the situation will be unpredictable. That goes without saying, but I often sometimes will act, so if you blow off the audition, you can guarantee that's not going to get you the job. You're almost guaranteeing now that you're going to be unemployed. So that's your own doing. So that's the biggest thing with self-sabotage. The first step is education and awareness. Okay, this is what's really happening. I'm my own worst enemy. Not other people, not my teacher, not the casting director, not the producer, but me.
The other thing that just occurred to me, do you see self-sabotage and imposter syndrome kind of work in the same way? Now, here's my thing that I'm getting at. When I used to work with individuals with substance use disorder, they would experience a period of sobriety. They'd be feeling good. They'd have positive relationships. They'd be hearing compliments. And all of a sudden, they would say, I'm not really I'm not sure I'm worthy of all of this praise because of what's happened to me in the past. And then what they will unconsciously do is return to behaviors that sabotage their success. And then when they talk about this with me, it's like they're trying to kick themselves in the butt for it. I just said, look, you just reverted to what you knew best. You're not the first person that's been questioning, am I deserving of all of the success because of all the pain that I caused in the past? Or because of the messages that I heard as a kid saying that I would never be good enough. So yeah, you have the right to question that. But at the same time, you also can choose not to buy into those past messages and take a look at the success that you're experiencing as legitimate and as real, and the
Yeah,
foundation for further growth.
absolutely. And that's really important. And yeah, I do think that they're really hand in hand, imposter syndrome and self-sabotage. Because self-sabotage is a protective mechanism, protecting us even from scary thoughts. And the scary thoughts could be just change in general.
Mhm.
Even going back with the person who used to be a drug addict, there could be safety in that label too. There can be safety in that diagnosis. And sometimes being sober can be scary because
Mhm.
it's new territory.
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes a behavior we know is a behavior to go back to, even though we know it's going to cause chaos. It's still a comfort zone for us. We developed our self-esteem by our ability to survive chaos or even manage it.
mhm,
So I know you do a lot with hypnosis, and I know you're a certified hypnotist. How do
mhm.
you leverage hypnosis and mental performance for creative success, regardless of who you're working with?
Well, the main thing with hypnosis is the power of the mind. So a lot of times it's visualization is very important. So a couple of things we can do here. Usually what I might ask someone to do is to imagine a time in their life where things absolutely amazing,
Mm-hmm.
like one of the best moments of their life. And then I'll have them go back to that in their imagination. Go back to them on what did it feel like? What was this picture like? What did you hear? What did it feel like? And then what I would do is through that breathing, okay, let's generate that in the body more and more and more to a point where it's like at a 500% scale level. Like really now take that same feeling and apply it to going on an audition or taking a test or
Mm-hmm.
giving a public speech. Because when you can do this, and we use something called anchors, and it's similar like the stimulus response that we've all been taught in basic psych. So I might have them, when they're imagining this amazing experience that they've had and what it felt like in the really the moment, I'm like, okay, make a circle with your thumb and your forefinger. And every time you make that circle, you're brought back to that moment of greatness. So now when you're about to give that audition or when you're about to give that speech, you make the circle with your forefinger and thumb. And that is kind of like a form of self-hypnosis right there. Um, and then you could also have them visualize, beforehand, whether it's they have an audition coming up or they have a test coming up or they have a speech coming up or a class coming up that they have to teach. What we do is have them in a moment, imagine themselves giving that presentation and then going into the detail about that later. Um, bring those feelings up in your head and let them go and like 10 times it. And then bring those same feelings as you're watching yourself in your mind give this speech. So now I'm putting someone in a very almost a extreme flow state while they're imagining themselves giving that talk, taking that
Mm-hmm.
test. Because the interesting about the brain is it does not know the difference between, imagination and reality. And neuroscience research proves that. Because when a person's having an experience, certain parts of the brain light up, but the same parts of the brain will light up when they're imagining it. So the brain does not know the difference between reality and fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some ways I would, in a nutshell, use that for people about to go into it, do something very important.
Besides people who don't believe in hypnosis, are there any individuals you won't do hypnosis with?
I would say people that are mentally ill, extremely mentally ill, or under the influence, I wouldn't necessarily do that. And I might not even describe what I just did. I'll usually say we're doing some coaching. So close your eyes and imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I'm really doing is hypnosis. I'm just not telling you I'm doing hypnosis. But that's pretty much what a lot of hypnosis involves. Imagination, going into your imagination and pulling different states together.
Yeah.
So I might, that's why I refer to myself as a performance mindset coach. It's a little vague, but I do use, hypnotic techniques in there without even saying I'm doing hypnosis, because that may make people nervous or apprehensive when they hear that word. Because a lot of times it's like they might see a hypnosis show on TV, or that in their college, high school graduation, where this guy went up on stage and asked someone to bark like a dog or call like a chicken.
Yeah.
And but when people bring that up, I also bring this as a teaching moment too. I'm like, first of all, number one, they're volunteers. They're already volunteered to do the show. And it's just about being comfortable. That's all it is.
Mhm. Yeah, comfortable and being receptive.
Yeah, that's all it is. And anybody who's under the influence or people that are mentally ill, I probably wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Or people have had some severe trauma initially. If I'm just doing some simple processes, I might not. Because sometimes what can happen is if someone goes into a deep trance and they had a lot of trauma, that can come up.
Absolutely.
And, which is great if I'm working with somebody one-on-one, but not if I'm doing a group demonstration in a classroom. Also, I don't debate people. So if somebody comes up to me, you can't hypnotize me, but you're right. And I move on. Because the reason is that no matter how great any hypnosis person could be excellent, but we cannot override free will.
Yeah.
So if you already with the mindset of can't be hypnotized, you're right. So, and I don't look, my life saying I have to prove it to you. Now you can say you're skeptical of it. That's a different story. But if people walk up to me and say, I bet you can't hypnotize me, I'm like, you're right, I can't. Because, and you can't, that's another thing, a misconception to address is, we cannot hypnotize anybody who does not want to be hypnotized. There's no, again, we cannot override free will as much, so, and that's what I tell people, look, you're in control. And the entire time. And I think a lot of times people get confused with hypnosis because they'll see people, again, on these stages, their eyes are shut, they're in a catatonic state. But what a lot of people who haven't experienced it yet do not realize that A, they're completely aware, awake, and alert. So one of the things that we used in the past, which kind of sticks to us, which is the word sleep. So they'll watch a station and they'll snap his finger, you'll sleep, and people drop down. And, people think, oh, I'm blacking out. No, that's not the case. So, when somebody's afraid of it, that's what I kind of understand. Like, first of all, you can be aware of everything. And that's why some people, even when they undergo hypnosis session, they come out and say, I really didn't feel like I was hypnotized. I'm like, well, why do you say that? Well, I heard everything you said. I'm like, okay. That's good. You're supposed to.
Yeah.
You're just in a more hyper alert state, and you don't even need to be relaxed to be hypnotized. Advertisers, politics, the media, they're hypnotizing us every day. We only use relaxation to kind of get you into a more receptive state. But other than that, I could say the right phrases if you're open to it.
Yeah, and like you said, you can't hypnotize somebody who doesn't want to be hypnotized because we do have free will.
Yeah.
And you're not going to argue with that. I mean,
Mm-mm.
you're not going to convince somebody they can do something or should do something if they don't want to do it. Besides, in the context of any type of therapy that you're doing, it's unethical to try to force somebody
Of
to do
course.
something that they don't want to do.
Yeah, they're not going to follow through, even if that's the case. One of the first things myself and a lot of colleagues do when somebody wants help is find out what their own motivation is.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to take your money. I'm not going to take your time because you're not going to follow through.
Yeah.
And that's why I like when people come in, oh, my spouse, my parent, or, my job is requiring me to come here. I'm like, you're wasting your time. Now you could call me when you want to come. And not just for hypnosis, that's just in therapy in general or coaching in general. Is you have to want to do that.
Yeah, because eventually, I mean, you'll respond initially to outside pressures from your wife, your girlfriend, your significant other to change your behavior, but that coercion isn't going to last for too long. And then eventually the person's just going to drop out or they're going to find excuses to not engage. They have to do it for themselves. there are consequences as far as positive relationships and engaging in the world productively. But if they're not self-motivated to do that, they're not going to do it. So I know you've talked, I think, on other podcasts about AI. How does AI factor into the work that you do with individuals who request services?
Well, it can help me, number one, to do a little bit of research on them, like figure out what exactly, their profile is, the type of personality type and all that. It can help them with ideas for productivity. The best use of AI is what I call human in the loop, human generated,
Hmm.
with AI assistance, not AI generated.
Hmm.
So it's like partnering up with AI, not depending on it
Yeah.
for everything. Because you're not going to get that. You'll get sometimes an okay or even sometimes a good response by chance,
Hmm.
but it's not going to align with you or it's not going to be you.
Yeah.
So when I talk about AI, it's all about the human in the loop, we call it, where it's like, okay, if I'm prompting AI for help me do something, whether it's rewrite a letter or rewrite a cover letter or something, I like, instead of saying like the AI, please generate this, what I often will like to have is a piece of writing already done. And then
Hmm.
use AI and say, okay, I need to tighten this up, keep my main voice, but just, maybe enhance this message a bit. And that's when I feel like the sweet spot is for me. Rather than say, okay, write me this, this
Yeah.
cover letter or write me this letter. So it's going
Yeah.
to give me a letter that's going to be very robotic and so and almost soulless. So I think what's important though is to use it as a partner,
Yeah.
and then, but at the end of the day, any content that you put out there should always be approved by you,
Hmm.
generated by you with the assistance of AI.
Yeah. We're going to shift focus for a little bit.
Hmm.
Tell us about Bramante Artist, how that vision for you came about, who's involved, and what your mission is.
Sure. Well, I've always, owned my own companies. I've never, I've been doing the agent thing for over 20 years and I've always had my own companies. I mean, I did partner up for a couple of years, but I never worked for anybody else. So when I started, my first company was called Emerging Talent, and I had that from 2004 to 2020. And then 2021, I had partnered with another agent, and opened up a newer office, which is I combined my first agency with another agency. And then that partnership, kind of ran its course. And 3 years later, I said, you know what, I want to open to Bramante Artists. When I first started Emerging Talent, I was new. The clients I was representing were new. But now, almost 20 years later, people know me. I think I can use my namesake. And so that's where I created Bramante Artists.
Yeah, and just looking at your website, it sounds like you had a variety of different things going on, a variety of different projects, some very creative individuals working with you. So I certainly wish you continued success with that
Thank
endeavor,
you.
Albert.
Thank you. Yeah, I work with some great people. I have an assistant who wonderful. I have another person who's an agent who does amazing things.
Yeah, and we're only as good as the people we have around us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a very wise mentor teach me that your ability to succeed as a leader depends on the trained staff and people that are aligned with what you want to do and are going to operate to achieve the mission. So, yeah, that's something that's always stayed with me. And I'll probably take that to my grave. And now I also understand you wrote a book.
Yes, I did. In 2024, I published Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt, Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists.
And is that something you use hand in hand with your coaching as well, too?
I do. It's all about dealing with self-sabotage and, overcoming self-imposed limitations. The metaphor Rise Above the Script is all about the negative self-talk, identity self-talk. A lot of times actors use or sometimes use the notion I'm a starving artist, I'm a struggling artist. And when you run an internal script, it's going to be self-sabotage. As I said earlier in our talk here, how our brain confirms expectations.
Yeah.
So if we have the script of I'm a starving, out of work actor, and that's my, or aspiring actor, again, my brain is going to be looking for ways to confirm that expectation. So, and my behavior, it'll cause me to do behaviors that match that expectation. Instead of saying you're a starving actor, say you're a working actor, you're a working professional actor.
Mhm.
And that creates, when you start identifying that identity, your behaviors are going to change. Say, okay, this is what a working actor does.
From your book, what do you want people to take away from the book? What do you want them to learn? What do you want them to basically take away from it?
What I want is for people to realize how they can really transcend their own limitations. So create the reality. You can create your own reality.
Yep. We can co-create our own reality in conjunction with the universe. It's a message of empowerment, that
Absolutely.
everything we need to succeed is within us.
Yes. And that's the point about it. It's really a core message in my book.
And it sounds like again a very impactful book. Did you write this recently? When did it come out?
It came out in 2024. It was years in the making, though. It was loosely based on my doctoral dissertation, because my doctoral dissertation was on self-defeating behavior in performing artists. So it kind of based on that. I used the outline for my dissertation for the book. I just used a lot more up-to-date examples and relatable stories, and then, so I combined it, translated that into a book.
Well, again, as with Bramante artists, I wish you success. I hope that book gets into the hands of anybody and everybody that needs it.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Now, for one of my last questions for you tonight, I got two more left.
Okay.
One, you've left our listeners with a lot of good stuff today about self-sabotage, about imposter syndrome, about the work that you do and how it's nuanced differently for performers and teachers and students. But if you're going to leave our listeners with one ultimate wisdom, one takeaway today, Albert, what would that be?
The biggest takeaway that I would say is that you are enough and you are capable of achieving greatness. You just have to believe that.
Yeah, sounds like a pretty similar message I would give to my students too, or anybody, so that's a great way to conclude our conversation. But before we actually officially conclude, I'm going to give you an opportunity to promote yourself a little bit. If listeners want to contact you, contract for your services, purchase your book, what's the best way for them to do that, Albert?
Well, I would say the way to purchase my book is go on Amazon. Just look for Rise Above the Script. It's available as an ebook as well as paperback and audiobook. But you can also go to my website, albertbramante.com, and, or connect with me on social, LinkedIn, Instagram. I'd love to connect with all of you, and love to stay in touch.
And with that, Albert, thank you so much for wonderful conversation today.
Thank you, Dave, for having me.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.
Thank you.